Artur, thank you very much for joining us here today. There's been a lot of talk around the corridors this morning about the state of the LCA text at the moment. Could you give us an update on how that is looking? Because it seems that there have been problems within the negotiating chambers.
I don't think that we talk about problems here. I think what is happening is that different countries have been looking at this text and they think it's not yet ripe, so they need to do more work in order to get their ideas captured. So I think that's just a very normal thing for a negotiation process. The text will look different when there's compromises that are sellable to everybody.
And as a diplomat, how do you ensure that those compromises are achieved? Because certainly from hearing people this morning, it sounds like there are fundamental differences between the chair and other negotiating teams, and those seem intractable.
You see, the chair is there in order to facilitate. He will have to take from the parties what the parties think is going to be, what you can compromise on. If you, as a chair, try to sell something people don't like, then, okay, you will not be a successful chair, isn't it?
And at what point in negotiations does more leadership from the very top, when is that needed from the COP presidency? Is a time coming where perhaps President Al-Attiyah may need to step in and sort of take some leadership on this issue?
You see, this normally is happening during the high-level segment. That is the time when the COP presidency takes over and looks at how far have the senior mandarins come in terms of negotiating the text, and then he will take ministers to task and say there might be some outstanding issues that needs to be resolved, and that usually happens under the leadership of the COP president.
And you were a very experienced negotiator. Many people here will have seen you in the corridors wandering about over the past few years. Is there always a sense of nervousness, a sense of tension building up at this point in the first week when you know the ministers will be arriving next week and expecting to see some tangible results from that first week talks?
No, of course. I think everybody knows that this is a time-limited meeting and you need to get to results. Everybody on day one has said we want to see a successful outcome from Doha. So now it's hard work. That's the only thing that's going to help in order to get to that successful outcome. And it's true, the closer the time comes that ministers will arrive, it will become more hectic. A lot of many hours in the evening are going to be spent. I think that's very, very, very sure. We have an agenda that is super full. It's many more than 130 items, I think, on the agenda, and we have to get through this by mid-next week in order to show something that looks good to ministers. Otherwise, they will all get angry with us.
Your Chinese colleague Su Wei said yesterday that if the LCA was not agreed, at least there was a text on the table by the end of this week that would block any progress in any other negotiating track. Do you see it in those terms? Have we got to a point where something needs to give?
It's probably something in order to up the stakes to say something like this. I'm very confident that there will be text because I know in these little groups at the moment they are producing text on which then a final negotiation can take place. So I'm rather confident that this is not going to happen, that there will be no text on Saturday.
And you were saying the track that you are involved in deeply is the Kyoto Protocol. That's clearly an issue which is close to the hearts of many people here. How have you been progressing with the protocol, and can you tell us a bit about the state of talks with Poland? They have a lovely stall just over to our right with the new conference centre for COP19, which they're very proud of. But how have the negotiations with Poland regarding how they will fit in with the EU's plans been going?
I think on the Kyoto Protocol, let's say that those people who negotiate that, they know each other for quite some time because negotiations have been going on for a long time. It's a relatively small group compared to the other processes. We know each other so well that I think we are really down to professionalism. I think we had a good start over the last 2 days, trying to fit all the different ideas into single texts, go through the texts in the coming days, and hopefully by the beginning of next week have something that is as clean as possible. We know, of course, that some of the more difficult issues, the big issues under the Kyoto Protocol, they will have to be decided by ministers. But I'm confident that we can produce options that are very clear, that have been worked up very well, so decision making shouldn't be too difficult.
Has the hot air issue been satisfactorily resolved yet?
The hot air issue we haven't discussed yet. It's coming up tomorrow. We'll probably spend almost the whole day tomorrow to look at the proposals that are on the table. The one from the developing countries, and also a Swiss proposal that was sent to the Secretariat only recently. So that, I think, is going to be the basis for further negotiations.
And in terms of negotiating here, there are clearly lots of signals being sent out by different parties. Are those often, in your experience, are these just to stake out positions rather than intractable negotiating stances?
I think just look back to all the other 17 COPs before. If they would have been intractable, then we would never have come even to the UNFCCC or a Kyoto Protocol. So I think this is all up for compromises next week. And many things are very political, so ministers will put their fingerprints on those compromises.
Can you tell us a bit about long-term finance? How do you see that being resolved by the end of next week?
I think these days one needs to define what is long-term finance. When we talk long-term finance, I think most of the people say that's something in the year 2020. Of course, what's more important is to say what is about finance next year. How are the programs and projects that are being worked up by developing countries at the present point in time, how are they going to be resourced during the course of next year? I think that is going to get much more attention, and I can hear that already in the corridors. Some people talk about the climate finance cliff or the climate finance gap and these kind of things. I don't think that there will be a cliff or a gap. I think we are working very closely with developing countries in order to define for next year programs for expenditure. So I think that is something where we need to give sufficient reassurances to developing countries. When you then come to about financing in the year 2020, there is more talks necessary to that. There's the whole issue of public and private finance that needs to be sorted out. We talk about innovative sources. The talk has started with the reports we have seen in the last years, but no decision really has been taken on that. So I think that will require further negotiations. I don't think that this is going to be decided at this COP.
The financial transactions tax is one potential innovative source that you've mentioned. Is there still a split within the EU camp over that? I know the UK have not been keen because it might potentially affect the banking sector, but I think Germany and France were in favour. Can you give us any sign on whether that might be a way forward?
Let's say this could be potentially a way forward, but we know that there is limited support for that. It's not in all countries. And if you want to have a global response, you probably need to have more parties rallying behind that in order to make it an innovative mechanism for climate finance. Having said this, I think one of the interesting things in France is that they have announced already that part of the financial transaction tax would be used for developing countries and also in the context of fighting climate change.
And in terms of other countries contributing, at the recent biodiversity conference in Hyderabad, India put $50 million on the table, I think, as a show of goodwill. Do you think that would help matters if not necessarily Qatar, but other countries perhaps in this region also put forward financial pledges that didn't just put the onus on the developed countries?
Of course, every little bit of money that is added to the pot is going to help in order to assist those who are in need to also make their contribution in the fight against climate change, and also for them to be able to adapt to the adverse effects of climate change. That's all welcome.
And I guess on a final point, the words I've just used in developing and developed have been used a lot, I suppose, within these negotiations. Can you give us your view on whether you feel the split between developed and developing is as simple as that? And if it's not, could you, I guess, explain where some of those divides lie?
No, I think that kind of if you look into the real world and if you look at developed countries and developing countries, you will find developed countries that resemble more developing countries, and you will find many developing countries that probably resemble more a developed country. So the question is, how much sense does this definition make, and in particular when it comes to what kind of contribution you're going to make. And I think in that respect, if you look into the convention, where in its principles it talks about common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, that's a much more open term. That doesn't have this dichotomy, developed versus developing. And I think it's along those lines you need to look at what countries can contribute. And I think that's very much the same like in the European Union. The member states, the 27, are not homogeneous, although they are all developed countries. But if you look at them one by one, you will see there is a huge difference in income per capita, for instance, and that is something you need to take into account, even if you want to shape an effective and efficient climate policy in Europe. And that's something we, I think, have successfully done in Europe. Looking at this, and maybe that is giving some good ideas and examples also for other countries around the world, and maybe for this process as a matter of inspiration.
Well, just quickly picking up on that, I guess Bulgaria probably has a lower per capita income than Qatar. So is it time, and I suppose this will be part of the Durban platform negotiations, to reassess that firewall, where that line is?
I think definitely, but again, it is not about creating a new dichotomy. I think it's really about looking at individually each country, what are your capabilities, what are your responsibilities, what can you contribute, how much in need are you for external assistance when it comes to tackling climate change.